The phone call came on a Tuesday evening, 7 years ago. My mother's voice tight with panic as she explained that Dad had been laid off from his job of 23 years at the manufacturing plant. She tried to sound optimistic, saying they'd figure things out, but I could hear the tremor of fear underneath her words. By the weekend, when I drove home for what they'd called an emergency family meeting, the full scope of their financial crisis became clear. They'd missed 3 mortgage payments already, had maxed out 2 credit cards trying to keep up with bills, and the bank had sent a foreclosure notice giving them 90 days to catch up or lose the house. My brother Ethan sat quietly during this meeting, nodding sympathetically but offering nothing concrete, while I mentally calculated my savings and wondered if I could help without destroying my own financial stability. Dad kept apologizing, saying he never thought, at 55, he'd be in this position, and Mom clutched his hand, both of them looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen them. I spent the next 2 weeks researching options, consulting with a real estate attorney I'd met through work, and reviewing my finances with a level of scrutiny I'd never applied before. The attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen, suggested something unconventional. Instead of loaning my parents money they'd likely never be able to repay, I could buy the house at the foreclosure auction and lease it back to them at an affordable rate. This would save their credit, give them housing security, and protect my investments simultaneously. The idea felt calculated and cold, but Rebecca pointed out that family loans rarely ended well, and this arrangement would establish clear boundaries and expectations from the start. I liquidated my retirement accounts, took out a personal loan, and scraped together $340,000 to bid on the house when it went to auction. My parents were grateful when I told them I'd worked something out with the bank, and they signed the papers I presented without reading them carefully, trusting that I was helping them navigate mortgage assistance programs. I never explicitly lied, but I never corrected their assumptions either. The first year of this arrangement was relatively smooth, with my parents dutifully writing checks to Homestead Holdings LLC each month, believing they were paying their restructured mortgage. I'd set the rent at $4,000 monthly, which covered my loan payments, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance with a small margin for unexpected repairs. Dad found contract work after 6 months, not making anywhere near his previous salary, but enough to contribute to household expenses. And Mom picked up part-time hours at a local boutique. They seemed relieved and grateful, often thanking me during family dinners for saving them from financial ruin. Meanwhile, Ethan continued living in their basement, ostensibly working on various business ventures that never quite materialized into actual income. He'd emerge during these dinners with grand plans about apps he was developing or consulting services he was launching, and our parents would listen with rapt attention, praising his entrepreneurial spirit while I silently calculated how much their investments in his ideas had cost them over the years. By year 3, the pattern of favoritism that had defined my childhood had fully reasserted itself, despite the financial reality of who was actually supporting the household. Mom would call me to complain about money being tight, then mention in the same conversation that they'd loaned Ethan $5,000 for another failed business venture. Dad would praise Ethan's ambition at family gatherings while barely acknowledging that I'd been promoted to senior analyst at my firm. When Ethan got engaged to his girlfriend Sarah, our parents threw them an engagement party that cost more than my monthly rent payment. And when I gently suggested they might want to be more careful with money, Mom accused me of being jealous of my brother's happiness. I attended the destination wedding in Mexico that they had partially funded, watching them beam with pride while I did the mental math of how many months of property taxes that trip represented. My coworker James, who'd become a close friend, listened to me vent about the situation over drinks and kept asking why I didn't just tell them the truth. But I couldn't articulate exactly why I was protecting them from their own ignorance. the breaking point came last month when Mom called to invite me to a special family announcement dinner with an excitement in her voice I hadn't heard in years. I arrived at the house I secretly owned, carrying a bottle of wine and genuinely curious about what news warranted such fanfare. Ethan and Sarah were already there, Sarah visibly pregnant and glowing, and suddenly the pieces clicked into place before anyone said a word. Dad stood up after dinner, clearing his throat in that formal way he did for important pronouncements, and announced that they decided to gift the house to Ethan and Sarah, since they were starting a family and needed the stability. Mom added that they'd sell it to them for $1, making it official and legal. And wasn't it wonderful that the house would stay in the family for the next generation? They'd even prepared gifts for both of us. Ethan received a leather folder containing the deed paperwork, and I received a cheap frame containing a single key, which Mom explained was symbolic of how I'd always have a key to the family home. The casual cruelty of the gesture, the assumption that I'd be grateful for this token while they handed my $400,000 investment to my brother, hit me with unexpected force. I sat there for a moment, looking at that framed key, feeling 7 years of careful boundaries and swallowed resentments crystallize into perfect clarity. James had been right when he'd said that protecting people from consequences only enabled them to keep making the same mistakes, and Rebecca had been right when she'd warned me that family would always assume generosity was obligation. I excused myself to the bathroom, took several deep breaths, and made a decision that had been building for years. When I returned to the living room, I asked everyone to sit down because I had something important to share. The confusion on their faces as I pulled documents from my bag was almost comical, and I felt a strange calm settle over me as I began explaining what those mortgage assistance papers they'd signed 7 years ago actually were. Watching comprehension dawn slowly, seeing Ethan's face shift from confusion to anger to panic, observing my parents' expressions cycle through disbelief and hurt and finally recognition, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep, exhausting sense of finality. The aftermath of that revelation was predictably chaotic, with Ethan shouting about my vindictiveness and my parents cycling through denial and bargaining and anger in rapid succession. I let them vent, standing calmly by the fireplace in my house, holding the keys that actually mattered, and waited until they'd exhausted themselves before explaining the full situation. Yes, I own the house, but I'd been saving every rent payment they made into an investment account designated for their retirement, which now held approximately $380,000. No, I wasn't evicting them, but their lease was month to month and subject to the same terms as any tenant. Yes, I was evicting Ethan because he'd been living there without a lease, without paying rent, and without contributing anything except entitlement and expectation. The legal eviction notice I handed him was properly filed and notarized, giving him 30 days to vacate, and when he appealed to our parents to intervene, the look on Dad's face as he quietly said, "It's her house, son," was worth 7 years of silence. The following weeks were tense and awkward, with Ethan moving out in angry silence and my parents treating me with careful politeness that felt worse than their previous dismissal. I hired a property management company to handle the lease and maintenance going forward, removing myself from the day-to-day dynamics while maintaining ownership. Rebecca helped me draft a formal trust document for my parents' retirement fund, showing them exactly how much they'd accumulated and how it would be distributed when they decided to downsize. They were shocked by the amount, having never considered that I might be protecting rather than exploiting them. And Mom actually apologized through tears for assuming the worst. Dad took longer to come around, his pride wounded by the realization that his daughter had been supporting them while they'd been praising his son. But eventually, he acknowledged that I'd saved them from both financial ruin and their own poor judgment. Ethan sent me a single text message 3 weeks after moving out, saying simply, "I get it now," which was the closest he'd ever come to admitting he'd been wrong about anything. Now, 6 months later, I've established clear boundaries with my family that prioritize my own well-being over their expectations. I see my parents monthly for dinner, always at restaurants rather than the house, and we talk about neutral topics like their jobs and my work projects. They've started actually asking about my life, showing interest in my promotion and my new relationship with James, who turned out to be more than just a supportive coworker. Ethan and I have a cordial but distant relationship, exchanging pleasantries at family gatherings, but no longer pretending to be close. He and Sarah rented a modest apartment, and, interestingly, he finally found stable employment once he had actual bills to pay and no safety net to catch him. My parents have started talking about eventually selling the house and moving somewhere smaller, and when that happens, they'll have the financial security to do so comfortably because I planned for their future even when they didn't. The framed key they gave me still sits in my office, not as a symbol of family connection, but as a reminder that the only keys that matter are the ones you earn yourself, and that sometimes protecting yourself means letting other people face the consequences of their own choices. The hardest lesson I've learned through this entire experience is that love and fairness aren't the same thing, and that family members can genuinely care about you while still taking you completely for granted. My parents loved me in their own way, but they'd built their identity around Ethan being the special one, the one who needed protecting and supporting and celebrating, while I was just supposed to be reliably competent and undemanding. Breaking that pattern required me to stop participating in my own diminishment, to claim my worth not through confrontation, but through the quiet power of ownership and boundaries. When I look at the house now, I don't see a symbol of resentment or revenge, but rather a testament to my own capability and foresight. I saved my parents' home when no one else could or would. I protected their financial future when they were incapable of doing it themselves. And I did it all while maintaining my own stability and building my own life. That's not something to feel guilty about, regardless of how uncomfortable it made everyone when the truth finally came out. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people you love is refuse to enable their dysfunction, even when they hate you for it in the moment.